You've been told this is a painting about screaming. But that may be the first mistake. Look at the face. The mouth is open, a dark, hollow oval stretched into something that isn't quite human anymore. The head, thin as a skull. The eyes, wide and empty, like two holes worn through the skin. Everything about this figure says sound. We've spent more than a century certain we know what that sound is. Now look again, look at the hands. They aren't reaching out. They aren't clutching the chest or the throat the way someone might if a cry were tearing its way up out of them. The hands are pressed flat against the ears. And you don't cover your ears to hold a scream in. You cover your ears to keep one out. So before we go any further, set down the thing everyone assumes about this image. Because the longer you stay with it, the more it begins to whisper a stranger, sadder possibility that the figure on the bridge is not the one making the noise. That the figure is simply the only one who can hear it. And once you see it that way, you can't unsee it. Because look at what's happening to everything else. The bridge cuts across the painting like a blade, its railing dragging your eye away into the distance fast, almost violently, and the figure is left stranded at the very front of it, so close to the edge of the frame that it seems about to spill out of the picture and into your lap. There's no comfort in where it stands, no solid ground beneath it, and there's barely a body at all. Look at how the figure dissolves, no bones, no real shoulders. The clothes melt downward into long, wavering lines, the same lines that ripple through the water, the same lines that churn through the sky. The man, the fjord, the heavens, they're all made of the same restless, trembling current, as if someone had taken the boundary between this person and the world and simply rubbed it away. That's the quiet horror of it, not a monster, not blood. Just the terrible sense that the wall between you and everything else, the wall that keeps you intact, that lets you tell where you end and the world begins, has come undone. Everything is leaking into everything. And the only thing left to do is press your hands to your ears and try to keep the world from pouring in. Now lift your eyes to the top of the painting, to the sky. It burns. Bands of orange and red and sickly yellow ripple across the heavens like something molten, something wrong. It's beautiful in the way a fever is beautiful. And it raises a question people have argued over for a long time. Did Munch actually see this? The answer is stranger than you'd expect. Some have suggested there may have been unusual atmospheric conditions behind skies like this, strange, smoldering sunsets that lingered far too long. The kind of light that stops a person mid-step. It's entirely possible he looked up one evening and saw the heavens catch fire. But that isn't where the terror lives. Because whether the sky was truly that red, or whether his mind reached up and set it alight, the result was the same. He experienced it as if nature itself had turned against him, as if the world had stopped being a backdrop and become a presence alive, watching, unbearable. The sky in this painting is half real and half inner vision, and that's exactly why it works. You can't separate what he saw from what he felt. By the time the brush touched the surface, the outside and the inside had become the same thing, and remarkably, he told us so himself. Munch left behind an account of the evening that gave birth to this image. He had been walking along a road at sunset. He felt suddenly tired, drained in a way that had nothing to do with the walk. He stopped and leaned against a railing. And as he stood there, the sky turned the color of blood. He described feeling exhausted to the bone, trembling with a fear he couldn't name. And then came the sentence that changes everything. He wrote that he felt a great and infinite scream pass through nature. Through nature, not through him. Sit with that, because it's the whole painting in a single line. The scream did not start in his lungs. It came from outside him, from the sky, the water, the air itself, and passed through the world like a current passing through water until it reached him standing on that bridge with nowhere left to hide. He wasn't the source, he was the receiver, the one antenna sensitive enough to pick up a sound the world was already making. That is what those hands over the ears have been telling us all along. He is not screaming into the world. He is bracing himself against it. And here is the part that's almost unbearable once you understand it. Nothing is actually happening to him. No one is attacking him. There's no fire, no fall, no figure rushing at him out of the dark. It is, by every ordinary measure, just an evening. An ordinary road, an evening walk, a sunset, and yet inside that perfectly ordinary moment, something is collapsing so completely that a man feels the entire world come apart around him. You may know this feeling even if you've never had a name for it. The way a quiet room can suddenly become too loud. The way the light starts to feel like too much and your own skin feels like too much and the air itself seems to press against you. The way your body locks in place while your heart races as though it's bracing for an impact that never comes. Nothing is wrong and everything is wrong all at once. And the cruelest part is that you cannot point to the danger because the danger is the feeling itself. Today we have words for this. We would call it a panic attack. We might call it anxiety or dissociation or that strange, disconnected state where the world goes flat and unreal and you no longer feel anchored to your own life. We have language now. We have explanations. The small mercy of knowing that other people have stood where we're standing. Munch had none of that. He painted this in a time before most people had any way to describe what was happening inside them, before the inner storm had a vocabulary. He couldn't tell anyone he was having a panic attack because the idea barely existed yet. So he did the only thing he could. He didn't explain the feeling. He turned the entire canvas into the sensation itself, the dissolving body, the screaming sky. The hands clamped against the ears, and in doing so, he created one of the most unforgettable early images of a mind in the grip of panic the world had ever seen. He showed us the inside of an experience long before we had agreed to admit it was real, and he did it not as a stranger to suffering, but as someone who had been preparing for this moment in a sense, his entire life. He had learned about death early, and he had learned it in the body, not in the abstract. When he was only 5 years old, his mother died. A few years later, the sister he loved most began to fade from the same illness, and he watched it take her slowly in the close quarters of a house that could not save her. And his father, a man bent low by grief and faith, met that grief not with comfort but with a religion of fear, a God who watched and judged and waited. To be a frightened child in that house was to learn that the world could turn on you at any moment, and that even the heavens were not on your side. And there was something quieter and more frightening than any single death. Mental illness had shadowed his family, and Munch feared it might one day claim his own mind. He later wrote of fear, illness, and death as companions that had stood beside him from the beginning. So it would be too easy and too small to say that a sad man painted a sad picture. The truth is closer to this. Munch had lived near death and unraveling for so long that he had learned to recognize the moment the world itself begins to feel sick. He knew in his nerves what it felt like when the ground tilts and the air thickens and something inside you quietly comes loose. So when it finally came for him on that bridge, when the sky turned to blood and the scream passed through nature, he was, in the most terrible way, ready. He was the one person who would understand exactly what he was feeling and brave enough to put it where the rest of us would have to look at it. That is why the painting had to exist, not to frighten anyone. Because he had finally found the only language that could hold what he had carried since he was a child. And now, only now, look once more at the painting. But this time, don't look at the figure. Look behind it. There, in the distance where the bridge narrows into the burning light, are two other figures. Upright, calm, walking away. They are barely more than shapes, but they are people, and they are with him. According to his own account, two companions were there on that road as the world fell apart around him, and as he stood frozen, trembling, drowning in a terror he had no words for, they did the most ordinary thing imaginable. They kept walking, and this not the mouth, not the sky, not even the hands over the ears. This may be the cruelest detail in the entire painting, because his world was ending. The heavens were on fire. An infinite scream was pouring through nature and straight into him. And the people closest to him, the ones near enough to touch, felt none of it. They walked on into the evening as if it were simply a pleasant night, because for them it was. That is the loneliness at the heart of this image. Not the loneliness of being alone. He wasn't alone. It's something worse. It's the loneliness of suffering completely, totally, while standing right next to people who cannot feel it. Of living through the end of the world while someone beside you comments on the sunset. There is no isolation more complete than that, to be in unbearable pain and to be invisible in it. The painting stops being about fear in that moment. It becomes about being unheard, and maybe that's why this figure has haunted us for over a century in a way no realistic portrait ever could. Because notice, it has no face, not really, no age, no clear gender. Munch sanded the features down to almost nothing. 2 hollow eyes, that open mouth, a head like a wisp of smoke. This was not a mistake, and it was not a lack of skill from a man who could paint beautifully when he chose to. It was the entire point. He didn't want you to look at this figure and see a stranger. He wanted you to look at it and find a door. A figure with no identity is a figure anyone can step into. It isn't a portrait of a man on a bridge in Norway. It's a portrait of a feeling, and feelings don't have faces. They only wait for someone to fall into them. He was leaving an empty space on that bridge. And he was leaving it for us. Because here is the part that should give us pause. More than 100 years later, we did not escape that bridge. We move now through a constant humming current of noise, more to see, more to answer, more pulling at our attention than any mind was built to hold. Late into the night, the same restless, trembling lines that ripple through his sky and his water seem to run through our days. Invisible but always there, and quietly in enormous numbers people are standing on that same bridge. Feeling the world become too much. Feeling the boundary between themselves and everything else wear thin. Pressing their hands to their ears against a scream that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Most of us have learned to keep walking, to be one of the 2 distant figures moving on into the evening, not because we feel nothing, but because we've decided we cannot afford to stop. And some of us on some nights are the one at the front of the bridge. So maybe the scream never stopped. Maybe it was always there, passing through the world the way Munch said it did. And the only thing that has changed is that more of us now have learned to hear it. He gave us no name, no story, no comfort. He gave us only an open mouth, 2 raised hands, and a sky on fire, and he asked us to stand in front of it and feel something we usually try very hard not to feel. So perhaps the question was never whether the figure on the bridge is screaming. Perhaps the real question is the one Munch was quietly asking all along. Was he screaming, or was he simply the first one brave enough to show us what the world sounds like when the mind can no longer protect us from it?